Hello, beautiful souls. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. My name is Carolyn and I'm abnormal. And this channel is all about true crime, mystery, and anything abnormal. So let's get right into the story. So this story takes place in Japan. And on January 28, 2000, a mother called the police and mental health services requesting a home visit to check on her son. So when the police get there, they go upstairs to where the son lived, and immediately the son tried to attack them. So the police obviously were able to restrain him, and a mental health services that were with him injected him with a sedative. So they removed him from the home and took him to the hospital. And the police and the mental health services people thought that their job there that day was done. That was until they looked at the bed and they could see something moving underneath the sheets. The police had called out to what they assumed was a person under the sheets, asking them to come out, and they were getting no response. So they lifted the sheet back and got the shock of their lives. When they pulled back the sheet, it revealed a very young, pale, extremely thin, and extremely sick looking young woman. So when they had lifted back the sheet, they asked the young girl what her name was, and she just looked at them and she was panicked. She was darting, her eyes were darting around the room. They could tell she was terrified. And they kept asking her, "What is your name? Who are you? What are you doing here?" Very trying to just figure out who this girl was. And she refused to respond. She just kind of kept darting her eyes around the room, looking at different people. And so the police looked at the mother, who was the one who had called the police, and they're like, "Who is this? Like, who is this?" And the mother just said, "I don't know." And then the young girl looked at the mother and said, "Can I just stay here until he gets back?" And the police could tell something was very wrong in this situation. So they decided they were going to take the girl to the hospital. She obviously needed medical attention, and they needed to figure out who she was and what she was doing here. So once they get her to the hospital, and it takes them a bit of time to convince her that she is safe. They're trying to get her to tell them her name. And it took a little while, but eventually the nurses and doctors were able to convince her that she was safe and she could tell them who she was. And in a very low, quiet, terrified voice, she said, "My name is Fusanka Santo." As soon as she said her name, everyone knew who she was. And they were shocked because they couldn't believe that she was in front of them and that she was alive. So who was Fusanka Santo? And I apologize, I'm probably not pronouncing her name correctly. I did try to listen and get the correct pronunciation, but I'm sure I'm mispronouncing her name, and I really apologize for that. So she had been kidnapped 9 years earlier, and everyone assumed that she was dead. She had just disappeared, and no one could ever find her or find any trace of what happened to her. So they were very shocked. Obviously, they were happy that, she was alive, but they were very confused about what had gone on. Now, who was Santo? And Santo is the kidnapper. He was a very dark and disturbed man, and he had been very dark and disturbed his entire life. When the police had done interviews with neighbors afterwards to find out how had this girl been held captive for 9 years and no one knew, So they started asking the neighbors to tell them more about Santo, the kidnapper. And they all kind of had the same story. He was a very strange, violent man. And they all had stated he had been bullied a lot when he was a child. And in high school, he got a car and he used to wake up in the morning, go outside, scrub his car all day long, and then go in the house and the next day come out and do the same thing again. So he had issues from a very, very young age. And his parents had taken him to try to get some mental health help and put him in the hospital. And the hospital basically just said he has really bad anxiety and he has OCD, and he's also a germaphobe. And he was very unstable. He was very violent and unstable his whole life. And when his father would come home from work, if his father had any dirt on him at all, he would freak out. He would punch his hand through the window, breaking the glass. He would break down doors. He was so out of control and so unmanageable. So he ended up dropping out of high school and he got a job. And at first when he started at the job, he was doing okay at the job. But one day he was walking, and as he was walking, there was a piece of a spider web that kind of came down and hit him along the face. And as he did very often in his life, he completely freaked out, lost his mind. Like, he would just go completely insane. Like, people were terrified of him when he would have these like explosive episodes where he would just seem so dangerous and out of control. And he went home that day and he scrubbed his entire body raw, and he never went back to work because he was too traumatized. And it was all because a little tiny piece of a spider web had touched his face. So then at this point, he's in his early 20s at this point, and he tells his parents he wants his own apartment. And he has no job, he never finished school, he didn't have any money. And so the parents said no, they couldn't really afford to pay for him to have a separate apartment. So when his parents told him no, he decided he would burn the house down. And fortunately, the fire that he set didn't burn the house down. It actually didn't end up causing that much damage to the house, but his reaction to being told no was to set the house on fire. And after that episode, his parents again admitted him into the hospital to try to get him mental health help. And he stayed there for a little while, but nothing was done. Like, he had been in and out of hospitals for mental health reasons, but he was never given any treatment. Like, nothing was ever done to help him. He would just go in, stay for a little while, and then the hospital would say, okay, take him home now. So then his parents decided, okay, we'll build you an apartment on like the upstairs of the house. So he would have an apartment upstairs. There would be a staircase connecting to the downstairs, and the parents would live downstairs. He liked this idea, so the parents started construction. But, you know, when construction's being done, it's really messy. It's really dirty. There's dust and dirt everywhere. So in the middle of the construction to build him this apartment, he freaked out again and just lost his mind, and he became very violent. And so they stopped the construction, and he ended up living upstairs in almost like a construction zone. Like, they had torn down drywall, so there was just like the wood on the walls and nothing was finished, but he wouldn't allow the construction to continue because it made a mess. And I don't know, Construction, yeah, construction, it's messy. Like, I'm not really sure what he was expecting, but yeah, so he just ended up living up there in basically a construction zone. And he would stay upstairs all the time, and he would just watch TV all day. He never did anything. He never went anywhere. He never did anything. And then his father passed away. And when his father passed away, he became extremely violent towards his mother. And his mother was terrified of him. He would abuse her constantly. Like, she lived in a constant state of fear. And it was also said that the mother had some mental health issues herself, but it was never specified as to what exactly was wrong with her. But she's terrified of her son. But a big question in this case is, how did he have this girl upstairs for 9 years and the mother didn't know? Because that's what the mother claimed. The mother claimed she had no idea who this girl was, and she said she had no idea that he had anyone up there. Now, this will become quite questionable a little bit later on in the story, because in my opinion, it was impossible that the mother didn't know. That's just my opinion. A lot of people agree. Some people don't. Some people have a lot of sympathy for the mom. And I do have sympathy for the mom because she was one of his victims. Like, he abused her, but it's a little questionable. But we'll get into that in a couple more minutes. I'll explain and go into a little more detail about that. So Santo's just living in a construction zone, being a complete psycho, terrorizing his mother, and he decides, you know what I should do? I should kidnap a little girl. And he decided that the perfect age would be around 9 or 10. Now, I know what you're thinking, a grown man wanting to kidnap a 9 or 10-year-old girl. We're all thinking the same things of why he wants to kidnap this little girl. But his motives are not what you're expecting at all. So before he kidnapped Fusenka, he had attempted to kidnap another little girl. So he had gone to an elementary school, and there were a group of little girls around the age that he was looking for, and one of them kind of broke off from the group. So he went and attempted to kidnap her and put her in his car, but she screamed, and they were at an elementary school. So as soon as she screamed, he kind of panicked and just got in his car and drove away. And then November 13th, 1990, sweet 9-year-old Fusenka is walking down the road alone. So Santo sees Fusenka walking down the road, and he pulled up a little ahead of her and then grabbed her and put her in the trunk. He then proceeded to drive around in circles for hours. He was just driving randomly all over the place for hours. And the reason he was doing this was he was trying to make her believe that she was somewhere very far away from where she lived. But the truth was, from where she was kidnapped to his home, it was only 55 kilometers away. But the fact that she had been driving for hours would probably lead her to believe that she was very far away from home. And she's just a 9-year-old girl at this point. And then he arrives at his home, and he takes her upstairs to his room where she would be for the next 9 years and 2 months. And her captivity is horrible. she was tied up 24/7. And when I was researching this, they said that she was tied up in a position that even the CIA would consider too much. Now, do I believe that there's any stress position the CIA thinks is too much? No. But it just gives you an idea of how much pain this girl was in, because the way she was tied up, she couldn't move at all. And when you're not able to move, it becomes very like there's a lot of stress on your body physically, like on your muscles, like your entire body is in this position, and it's excruciating. Like as time passes, it becomes more and more excruciating, the pain. And again, this is just a 9-year-old girl going through this. And he would abuse her, and his favorite thing to do when he would hit her was to hit her in the face, so that her eyes would swell closed. And he considered that good, because not only did he get the satisfaction of the abuse that he wanted to inflict, but it also made it so she couldn't see, which would obviously make it harder if she was to try to escape. But one thing that he never does is the one thing we're all assuming that he kidnapped her to do. A grown man kidnaps a 9-year-old girl. Obviously, you assume he is going to essay her. But the entire time she was held captive, he never assaulted her in a sexual way, which is very puzzling, because there was a lot of confusion about what exactly was his motive, because normally the motive is sexual, but in this case, it caused, during the trial, it caused a lot of speculation and a lot of confusion. I mean, obviously it's good that she wasn't abused in that way, but the abuse that she suffered was unimaginable. So when he kidnapped her and got her there, at first he was feeding her very well. He would feed her 3 meals a day, and she said he was feeding her a lot of food. Like, he was feeding her well. I mean, he has her captive, so it's like, are we giving him credit for feeding her? Like, I don't know, like, but one day he saw a bruise on her leg. And I mean, she was covered in bruises because he was abusing her constantly. But he became fixated on this one bruise, and he accused her as though somehow she had any control over this. He was convinced she had diabetes because she had a bruise. I mean, she had bruises everywhere. He just became so fixated with this one bruise. So he told her, well, I'm going to cure your diabetes. And his solution to curing her diabetes, which she doesn't have, this is just a delusion in his mind, he starts starving her because he thinks starving someone who's diabetic will cure them. Like, he's a complete psychopath, and none of anything he thinks is logical. But this part is just so insane. Another thing that he would do is he would tase her with a taser gun. So he started this from when she was kidnapped, right away, the whole time that she was kidnapped. And what he would do is he would tase her over and over and over until she stopped screaming. And probably, I think one of the most heartbreaking things in this case is Fusaka asked him, "Can I have the taser so I can practice?" She wanted to practice tasing herself so she could learn how to stop herself from screaming. And just in this whole case, that part, I don't know, it just broke my heart to have a 9-year-old girl saying to her kidnapper, "Can I have the tase gun so I can practice being a better victim?" Like, this guy's just so disgusting. He's so disgusting. Another part of her captivity that was very challenging for this young girl was she was extremely understimulated. So she was held captive for 9 years and 2 months in total. The last year of her captivity, he started letting her listen to the radio and watch television. But for the first 8 years, she would just be left in complete silence. She didn't have a book. She didn't have any stimulation at all. And it's actually something that a lot of people who have been held captive have said, that sometimes the boredom is worse than the abuse, because being so understimulated for such a long period of time really messes with people's minds, and they really start to lose their grip on any form of sanity that they have. She also developed atrophy of her muscles because she had been tied up for such a long period of time and never used her muscles. She lost the ability to walk. And something really sick was, after she was found, people kept saying, well, she wanted to be there. She didn't try to escape, so she must have wanted to be there. Like, what? Like, yeah, let's blame a 9-year-old girl because she didn't try to escape the right way. And Fusaka talked about how she very quickly gave up the idea of ever trying to escape. She said very quickly she just accepted that this was her life and this is the way the rest of her life would go. And even if she had tried to escape, she wouldn't have had the strength and the ability in her legs to be able to walk to even try to escape. And I mean, obviously, she's 9 years old. What does a 9-year-old know? And after they had, obviously when they rescued her, she went to a hospital and she was, given a lot of treatment. And she had severe PTSD, but she had a very, very intense dissociative condition. The way doctors would describe it was she could completely dissociate completely from her body, from her situation. Her mind and what she was experiencing around her were so disconnected that it took, obviously she needed years and years of therapy after this. And doctors had said this was one of the biggest challenges that she had when she was rescued, because she had dissociated for half of her life. She was kidnapped when she was 9, held captive for 9 years, so she was 18, but she still had the mind of a 9-year-old, and she had spent half her life dissociating. So that was sort of the hardest thing that they had to treat once she was rescued. And as I had mentioned earlier, once he was arrested and they were starting with a trial, everyone couldn't figure out What was his motive? Because obviously you assume grown man, 9-year-old girl, sick shit going on. Like there's nothing good happening. But they believe that his motive was that he liked the idea of watching her deteriorate. Like he enjoyed watching her get worse and worse and worse, and that he got pleasure out of watching someone deteriorate as badly as she did. And then obviously the next big question is, how did the mom not know? There's no way you can convince me that mother didn't know. First thing is, both Santo, the kidnapper, and Fusaka, who was the girl who was kidnapped, both talked a lot about this tasing and her screaming, and it constantly being her trying to learn to control her screaming. The mother lives downstairs. It's not even like he has an apartment and she's downstairs. There's literally, he's in an upstairs bedroom with this young girl. The mother's downstairs, and there's just a staircase in between them. There's not even doors or locks or anything. Like the mother could have just walked upstairs at any point. And she was also buying feminine hygiene products. So what the hell did she think she was buying those for? It's extremely frustrating that the mother, in my opinion, knew that this was going on and she didn't save her. She did start about a year after Fusaka was kidnapped. The mother started calling, trying to get the police and mental health workers to come to her home. So I don't know if maybe she was doing that to try to save the girl, or, I mean, she was being abused really badly as well, but you're a grown-ass woman and there's a 9-year-old girl being beaten upstairs. So I feel bad for you about this much. Like, obviously she didn't deserve any of the abuse that she suffered, but I mean, you let this go on. All she had to do, she wasn't held captive in the house. The mother lived her life and did whatever she wanted. All she had to do was go to a police station and say, I'm terrified of my son. He has someone captive in my home and he's extremely abusive to me. And this could have ended years ago. This could have ended as soon as the girl was kidnapped, but she didn't. After Fusenka was rescued, she spent a long time in the hospital. She had a lot of physical needs and obviously a lot of psychological needs, and she suffered very badly from PTSD. And eventually she did, go home and live with her family. And it was said that the only people that she would be around was her family. She was very afraid of anyone other than her family. She only trusted her family and she did not want to be around anyone else, which obviously makes a lot of sense. So one thing that her parents used to do was they would take her to the beach, to get her out of the house, and, hopefully this could kind of be healing for her. And then something unimaginable happens. She's at the beach one day with her dad and he drowns in front of her. And when I read that, I almost didn't do this story because of that, because it was so Like, it just, everything she's been through is so heartbreaking. But then she's finally rescued. She's finally back with her family. And then she has to witness one of the only people she's comfortable around die in front of her. And I couldn't find anything about how she's doing today, but hopefully, you know, she's doing better, and just hopefully she'll keep healing and keep getting better. You want to be really pissed off? Guess what Santos' sentence was? He kidnaps a 9-year-old girl. He holds her captive for 9 years and 2 months. And obviously throughout the story, I've told you all of the abuse that she suffered. His sentence was 10 years. He was sentenced to only 10 years in jail. And the reason that the sentence was so low was because at the time in Japan, for kidnapping, 10 years was the maximum sentence. So it wasn't like he went to court and the judge went easy on him. The judge gave him the highest sentence that he could. And afterwards, obviously, because of this case, so many people fought to increase how long you could go to jail for kidnapping. So they increased it to 15 years, which, I mean, obviously 15 years is better than 10, but like, if he would have kidnapped and held her for 30 years, he only would have served 10 years. Now, he was sentenced to 10 years. He served 14 years. He got in trouble a lot in jail. So his sentence got extended a little bit past the 10 years. He ended up serving 14 years. But 14 years for that? So in 2015, he got out of jail. And they gave him an apartment. Like, now, thankfully, in 2017, he was found dead in his apartment, apparently of natural causes, which, who cares how he died? Like, he's dead. That's all I care about. But can you imagine Fusaka in 2015? She's still trying to repair her life. She's still trying to heal. She's trying to manage losing her father. And then she has to find out this man is free. Like, telling you, I tell a lot of frustrating cases on this channel. This one, it really got under my skin. But thankfully, 2 years later, he just dropped dead. They said it was natural causes, and obviously no one cares how he died or why he died or whatever. Thankfully, he's dead. So she's at least has the peace to know that her kidnapper is dead. And that is the story. I never really know how to end these stories because, you know, they're so sad. But thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. If you'd like to see more from me, you can subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.